Tell us about these cliches and what is blinding us to keep repeating them.
There are two cliches which are actually very connected. One is the one you mentioned initially, which is AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. That is a cliche about how you think about the impact of AI on jobs. And then there's the other group which talks about the impact of AI on companies and organizations and takes a very pro-automation stance. And both of these cliches suffer from the same underlying issue in my view, which is that we see the impact of AI on tasks. We don't see the impact of AI on the entire system. The point that I'm trying to make is that the impact of AI plays out not through acceleration and automation and optimization of tasks. It's not an efficiency story. It's a re-architecture, reimagining story. You have to reimagine everything, where you compete, how you compete, what your organization's identity is, and what your job's identity is based on the new realities that AI brings up. Once AI gains the ability to learn from that unstructured information and extract insights and create what I would call institutional level memory, organizational level memory, it can then serve those insights into the right workflows at the right time to the right user. And so that changes the nature of how work gets done, who gets to make decisions, and so on. And that's why this shift is so important. Don't look at automation and what tasks are getting accelerated. Try to see how is the logic of your entire industry changing because of AI. So the level to which a Stripe can use AI is very different from the level to which PayPal can use AI, even though they are working with the same payments. There's a difference between players which are what I would call architecturally AI ready and ones which are not.
Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarino, and today I am thrilled to have with us Sangeet Paul Choudary. He is a celebrated thinker who has fundamentally reshaped how we understand the platform economy. And now with his new book, he is challenging us to rethink or think really deeply about how AI is changing our knowledge economy. For those that don't know Sangeet, he is the author of a best-selling book, The Platform Revolution, a book that became really an essential reading during the evolution of the business model that resulted in platform economies. He's advised the Fortune 500 companies. He's a senior fellow at US Berkeley. We are colleagues at the Fast Future Executive. And today we're really here to take a deep dive into his new book, Reshuffle, Who Wins When AI Restacks the Knowledge Economy. I have the privilege of holding it physically. I love physical books. I'm reading it. Welcome, Sangeet, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Effie. Such a pleasure to be here.
You are provocative, I must say. You keep challenging a lot of cliches that are floating around since ChatGPT came upon us. And some of these cliches are about if AI won't take your job, but someone who trains with AI will. The other ones are all about AI making companies automating everything, and that's the whole impact of AI. And you rebut all these in a way that is different, I must say. So let's talk about it. You talk about looking at AI beyond automation, understanding really what the deep change is. So tell us a little bit about these cliches and what is blinding us to keep repeating them.
Yeah, there are two cliches over here which are actually very connected. One is the one you mentioned initially, which is AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. That is a cliche about how you think about the impact of AI on jobs. And then there's the other group which talks about the impact of AI on companies and organizations and takes a very pro-automation stance. And both of these cliches suffer from the same underlying issue in my view, which is that we see the impact of AI on tasks. We don't see the impact of AI on the entire system. Now, the reason this is important is today a lot of the narrative on AI is around its performance on benchmarks. Is AI is good enough to pass the bar exam? AI is like having 5 PhDs in your pocket. So these are all performance benchmarks on skill performance and on applying skills to specific tasks. So it's still really focused on the task paradigm. Whereas when we really look at how technology drives impact, whether at the level of impacting jobs or impacting organizations and how they compete, the impact of technology plays out at the level of the larger system, not just at the level of individual tasks. And this is the thing that we often miss over here. So I'll just take a different example, because the point that I'm trying to make is that the impact of technology, and in this case, AI even more, plays out not through acceleration and automation and optimization of tasks. It's not an efficiency story. It's a re-architecture, reimagining story. You have to reimagine everything: where you compete, how you compete, what your organization's identity is, and what your job's identity is, based on the new realities that AI brings up. So let me take a simple example of a previous era technology, which will help us illustrate this. And I start the book with this example, which is the example of container shipping. When the container shipping first came up, before the era of the container, much of the world used to rely on unstructured, unorganized cargo transport, which was the idea of big bulk cargo, which essentially meant that cargo was not standardized and hence needed manual effort to load and unload off ships. When the container first came into being, its first order effect was that it standardized the cargo and hence it automated the port, because you didn't need a human to manage the messy interface of cargo. It could be done using a crane because the container was standardized. But if we stopped just over there, we would have missed the larger impact of the container, which was that once trucks, trains, and ships agreed on a standard format of the container, the logic of shipping completely changed globally. You could move goods from point A to point B, independent of where they were on the globe, with one single contract inside one single container, end to end. And that made shipping reliable, which essentially created the logic of global supply chains. Because before that, shipping was not reliable. You kept your suppliers close by, you kept things in house. Now you could outsource, you could have global supply chains. China came up, Singapore became powerful. And so the whole logic of how the world worked changed. Now, the reason this is important is because if we just look at the impact of AI on tasks, and we just look at the local effects of AI, you would have thought that once the ports got automated, the dock workers lost their jobs. So that's what really happens when technology comes in. But those were not the only jobs affected. There were other jobs affected, because once the reliability of shipping improved, you did not need middlemen anymore. You did not need local distributors, local warehouses to stock inventory in bulk. You could, because shipping was reliable, you could work with just-in-time inventory. And so all those jobs aligned with the older logic went away. So it's not just jobs don't get impacted because AI impacts tasks or technology impacts tasks. Jobs get impacted because technology changes the logic of how business works. And the jobs which align with the new logic gain, and the jobs which do not align with the new logic, they stand to lose. And so it's important to understand that the logic itself starts changing. And one final point I'll just make here, and we can go into AI examples following this, but I'll pause after this. But the final point I want to make is the reason I like the container example and I chose it is because what used to happen before the container was that shipping was unstandardized, the cargo was unstandardized. You needed a human interface to just work and solve that unstandardization, because you could not have a standardized, reliable way to work with it without human interface. And that's today what happens with a lot of knowledge work. A lot of knowledge work is based on unstandardized, unstructured information floating around in emails, in our Zoom calls. A lot of times this is not digestible, and hence we need a very old technology called meetings to get onto the same page. And so we spend too much time getting into meetings to make work happen. But once AI gains the ability to learn from that unstructured information and extract insights and create what I would call institutional level memory, organizational level memory, it can then serve those insights into the right workflows at the right time to the right user. And so that changes the nature of how work gets done, who gets to make decisions, and so on. And that's why this shift is so important, don't look at automation and what tasks are getting accelerated. Try to see how is the logic of your entire industry changing because of AI.
And what I'm hearing from you is something that we know, but we haven't recognized, which is in general, any standardization creates network effects. And we've seen that on phones or different hardware and software evolutions, APIs in terms of creating feedback loops, open ecosystems. We've seen that, we understand that. What I'm hearing from you, and it's something that, already by reading the first couple of chapters of your books, it's getting ingrained in my mind, is this shift in coordination. Who's in
Right.
charge of coordination? Or there's a complete redesign. Last night I was reading one chapter, and what came to mind was this Greek idea of Deus ex machina, like as if AI with its new capabilities is like this invisible force that is going to change, completely redesign, reorchestrate. I think you use that word, the coordination of work that's been what it's been up until now, but you're suggesting that it's going to be completely redesigned. So talk to us a little bit about what you refer to as the control points. You're saying in your book that there's going to be a major shift in terms of control points. Can you explain to us what you mean about control points? Maybe put it in context. I don't know if there's an example in financial services. Where is the control point? What do you mean a control point?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of a control point, today business works in connected ecosystems. What happens in connected ecosystems is that because you have the ability to connect into capabilities that other players provide, you either are really good at a capability or you try to borrow it from somebody else. So connectivity comes hand in hand with specialization and modularity, which is that your firm, the identity of your firm starts becoming more and more specialized over time. Now, what happens then in a scenario of connected ecosystems of specialized firms is that when every firm is specializing on a particular set of capabilities, not all of them are going to be equally powerful, and not all of them are going to have the right to serve the end customer. So there's a natural imbalance in power that happens in any connected ecosystem. A control point is the resource that you need to capture in order to be in a powerful position in an ecosystem. Because very often it's in the very nature of ecosystems that there'll be some players who will have greater control and who will have greater power. And that is not because they are negatively disposed or are extractive. That's a secondary point, which is about how they capture value. But even to create value, you need to have control. You need to be in a position to set some rules as to how the rest of the ecosystem should organize. And owning the control point helps you not just be in a powerful position, but it also helps you organize the ecosystem towards creating more value. This is something that a lot of people don't appreciate because they assume that control naturally leads to extraction, but control also leads to value creation, because without control, you'll just have chaos. So the idea of a control point is a scarce resource that you can capture either close to the customer on the demand side or away from the customer, where you are actually helping to organize the other players to work together on the supply side. So the control points can come up on both sides, but essentially once you capture it, you are able to dictate terms to the ecosystem, which helps create value better and reduce the chaos, but also helps you capture value more significantly, which can then result in extractive scenarios as we've seen with the big tech. But let me take a couple of examples over here. Whenever a technology shifts, there's an opportunity for a new player to gain access to the control point. So think of three types of control points. Traditionally, even before the internet, we've always had what I would call relationship based control points. If I'm a distributor or the reseller, I'm closest to the customer. So I have a relationship with the customer. That's a control point. And because I'm sitting at that position, I'm able to effectively levy a fee on anybody who wants access to the customer. So that's the distributor.
Can we think of car dealers or bank branches in
Exactly.
the context?
Absolutely. Car dealers, financial advisors, all of these are different examples of
So,
relationship based control points, right? Now, AI creates the opportunity to offer an intelligence-based control point. So let's say you used to go to a car dealer to figure out which car to buy, or you used to work with a financial advisor who would then advise you what to invest in, but then also would move you towards products that gave him a kickback, etc. But let's say that relationship can now be taken up by an AI assistant who can help you navigate those same choices. Now, that shift can happen in two ways. Initially, I could create an AI assistant that just helps financial advisors and car dealers do their job better. So I don't give it to the customer because I don't yet trust it. I give it to the whole network of car dealers, the whole network of financial advisors. They use it to solve the customer's problem. But in the process, I capture enough data to keep training the AI to keep getting better. I identify what are the gaps, what needs to be filled, what new knowledge needs to come in. And once the AI becomes strong enough, I can launch it as a consumer facing AI directly. So suddenly, the intelligence based control point has taken over the relationship based control point. So the relationship of the end dealer or the end advisor becomes weaker, and whoever owns the AI capability gets into a stronger position. So that's an example of a control point migrating away from a traditional relationship to a more centralized intelligence based model.
Yeah, and understood. You also talk, Sangeet, about a new kind of unbundling. You've been talking about unbundling. We understand it in the previous era when it was cloud and mobile were the big tech cycles. We understood how unbundling and rebundling worked. But now you're saying because of the new capabilities of AI, we're going to be risking for those that will be disrupted. And there's an opportunity, on the other hand, for others to unbundle fragmented choices and rebundle them using AI. Talk to us a little bit about the
Yeah.
new kind of unbundling.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen unbundling, rebundling with almost every major technological shift over the past 25 years, starting with the personal computer. But even the container example that I gave had its own unbundling and rebundling of physical manufacturing, moving
Yeah.
manufacturing into component-based models. The cloud is a great example because it unbundled capabilities across the value chain and allowed them to exist as independent, accessible capabilities. Now, the impact of AI plays out at levels. First, it creates a new mechanism to rebundle what the previous technologies have unbundled. So let me take an example. With the cloud, when unbundling happened, you now had companies providing really small, specific micro capabilities exposed through APIs. So the way to rebundle them was to create an interface, a cloud hosted interface, and make those API calls, all to build something like a Zapier where a user can come in and connect two or three APIs into a new workflow. But these were very static workflows. So the unbundling had been done by the cloud, but the rebundling was static workflows. So one thing that AI does is it can rebundle existing unbundled capabilities into dynamic workflows. You don't have to pre-decide, here's the static workflow. As long as the APIs are available, those resources are accessible, you can rebundle on the fly. So you can effectively create your own products, your own workflows from scratch. So that's one model where it takes existing AI can be applied to existing unbundled capabilities and rebundle them in a new way. The other thing that's interesting is that AI can unbundle what was previously completely bundled because there was no way to unbundle it. And the example I will take over here, or where this really applies, is what we've traditionally seen as tacit knowledge. Let's say you have a customer support team, and a customer support team tracks call logs and captures and records customer conversations and has tons of this information, which is not accessible to the rest of the organization. If you could train an AI on all of this information, you could create highly componentized bodies of knowledge about here's a component about product, here's a component about our channels that you can get out from those customer feedback, and that can then be rebundled into individual product marketing workflows internally in the organization. But what this also means is that if you have an R&D team, and traditionally the only way you have been serving that R&D across the organization into product businesses is to write a lot of documentation and then hold meetings and get them onto the same page. Now you can start providing AI-based components that can be called into workflows by these internal teams. And if your R&D is industry leading, you could commoditize some of that and sell it to external players so that they can call it into their workflows. So a lot more complex tacit knowledge based capabilities can also now be unbundled and rebundled into workflows. So that's really the opportunity we have with AI today.
So the reshuffling, one part of the reshuffling that you're talking about is about solving complexity that we couldn't even imagine that would have value and that we could take advantage of it. That we were like taking it as a given, as a friction, as a limitation. And now you're saying that there's a possibility to unlock intelligence through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is why this is a story that is much larger than the network effect story we talked about in the era of platforms. I think value that we or the opportunity we have with AI is not just about increasing scale through network effects. It's about increasing scope of activity through fundamentally new systems, fundamentally new workflows. Just the example I gave, you always had those APIs, but previously you could not dynamically create workflows around them. So the scope of workflow creation increases, the scope of organizational capability creation increases. And so there are all those possibilities that come to the picture. The second thing that's important with unbundling and rebundling is that you can also unbundle and rebundle your operations. And this is not very well appreciated yet. And I'll give a very simple example over here that I use in the book, which is the example of Shine, the fast fashion Chinese retailer, right? So traditional fashion worked on the model of sense the market by going to Milan, going to Paris, figuring out what the next trend is, then once you're convinced, do a big production run and then take it to market. Now, what Shane does is it unbundles all of them. So it unbundles the sensing. Every social media signal could trigger a new kind of a production run. Based on the social media signal, it creates a design. It then runs a mini production run, maybe 100 units, 200 units. And then it runs a mini test in the market. It sends it out, sees how people respond to it, and it either scales up or scales down and goes to the next trend. So the cycle, the operational cycle has been unbundled because all those things, the trend, the production run, and the test were unbundled. But because the cycle is now much shorter, your learning cycle improves dramatically. Shane is constantly learning from the market and capturing every trend. And that, again, unbundling, rebundling, we go back to the impact on jobs. That has an interesting impact on jobs because the role of the designer in a system like Shane is much more reduced because Shane is constantly learning what the designer had in his head because they are actively testing it in real time. And that's the stuff that we miss when we say AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will, because we're not really seeing how the system is getting unbundled and rebundled, how the operational logic of the firm is changing, how the competitive logic in the ecosystem is changing. All of those changes are happening together.
That's a brilliant example.
I
That
love that.
really, yeah, brilliant example. And what I'm also taking away from this is that we in the digital era, and I'm always thinking about the fintech and digital banking, we
Right.
definitely increase the feedback loops and the data and the intelligence from these feedback loops. But now we have the possibility of taking this to a very different level. So
Yeah.
the digital only or the digital first or the digital native financial services providers, call them fintechs as an umbrella term, will be disrupted by this reshuffling that you're talking about, because we're going to move to a very different level of feedback loops that's unbundling and creating, whether it's new investment products or new consumer banking products that we couldn't even imagine, that are a combination of what we know today in broader financial
Yeah.
markets.
No, I think so. You're absolutely right, Effie, because I think when we use a term like fintechs, we're grouping too many ideas into one single bucket, and it's not telling us what those things are. So let me unpack that a little bit. So even within this broad bucket of fintechs, there's a difference between players which are what I would call architecturally AI ready and ones which are not. So I'll give a couple of examples over here. A lot of payments players, PayPal, Adyen, Braintree, any number of payment players came up which were online, hence cloud hosted, and they had the logic of you could say that all of them were cloud hosted fintech players. But all of those players are fundamentally different from Stripe. Stripe in architecturally is cloud native in the sense that it is modular. It packages every payment as an independent module, which means that with AI, you can rebundle all those modular payments into fundamentally new workflows. If you want to do an audit, you do a different rebundling. If you want to do a CFO report, you do a different rebundling. So the kind of level to which a Stripe can use AI is very different from the level to which PayPal can use AI, even though they are working with the same payments, but their architecture constrains them. And so I think that's the key idea. Even when we say digital native versus AI native, I would really look at who is AI ready from the previous generation versus not. And I think Stripe is one of the very few players who is actually AI ready because they are architecturally modular. They are modular not at the level of capabilities, they're modular at the level of payments. Each payment is a module in itself, each transaction is a module. And I think that's what's powerful.
That's interesting, and it shows because they've already been able to launch all sorts of capabilities internally and for their clients. It's one
Right.
of the leading versus the Klarnas of the world that
Yeah,
are bragging about the efficiencies and
exactly.
how they're going to use that. Sangeet, I want to be reshuffling. I want one more question before we close and we tell our audience where to find your book and you and your services. I want to ask you about wallets because just by following you, listening to you, reading your book, it seems to me that wallets are going to play a very central role in this reshuffling. Do you see them as containers of these new what is the role that you see of wallets?
Yeah, I think the way I would see wallets is when we think about wallets, we are not just thinking about, in a way, money. We are thinking about identity. We are thinking about access. We are thinking about rights. And from that perspective, wallets are going to play a really important role. And who controls the wallet is going to be important, especially as we move towards agentic workflows. Because if an agent can interact with your wallet, who controls the rights of your wallet and who controls the access rights of the agent are going to be very critical. So I believe that like the first era of the internet was organized around a network of pages, the web 1.0, if you will, and second era was organized around a network of people, with social internet. If we are to get to a place where we are going to go to what people say a network of agents and people, we what is more important than porting relationships online and creating trust mechanisms is actually creating access right mechanisms and creating clear ownership mechanisms around wallets and agents. So I think that is something that the current architecture, which was built around somewhat the logic of centralized wallets being handled by human agency, it breaks down over there because a centralized wallet works with human agency within regulation. But a centralized wallet owned by the centralized player, now accessed by agents offered by the centralized player, creates significant conflicts of interest. And so we really need to re architect market activity again. We did that once with platforms. We need to do it again because even when it was done with platforms, was always initial idea of platforms was always to have a separation between buyer side interests and seller side interests. But that is not how it played out in the sense that if you look at Uber is simultaneously a buyer side broker, it's helping you find a ride, and a seller side broker, it's helping the driver find a ride. And in the process, because it is setting the price in the middle, it can manipulate both sides. And Uber is unique because in other marketplaces you can set the price and or consumers can bid, but in this case Uber sets the price. Now with agentic, that is the problem that ends up happening. If an agent has an access to your wallet and the rights to use it and also has the ability to set the price in the market, then there's a big conflict of interest because it's simultaneously acting on behalf of both parties. Then when that happens, it typically acts on behalf of neither party. It acts on its own behalf.
Yeah, interesting. More reshuffling expected, more
For sure.
changes expected. Sangeet, for our listeners, tell us about your book, about your services and activities, and where they can find you.
Yeah, my new book, Reshuffle, talks about all the things that we just talked about. So it's available on Amazon. You can also visit reshufflebook.com, which is the book's website. And you can visit platforms.substack.com, which is my Substack, where I write about this almost on a weekly basis. And apart from that, I run a think tank on these ideas on how competitive advantage is shifting, which works on joint research with corporates, works on advisory activities as well. So essentially, that's the focus of a lot of the work that I'm doing around Reshuffle.
Thank you so much, Sangeet, for your time and your brilliant ideas.